Try and make sense of this whole thing about gender fluidity and gender neutrality. What is cisgender, transgender? How can there be a person who is biologically a man but identifies as a woman? How can there be somebody who biologically is a woman but identifies themselves as a man? And then, of course, you have this whole business of pronouns, which frankly I don't understand, but Salvatore Babones does. He's an American sociologist. He's associate professor at the University of Sydney. Thank you very much, Professor Babones, for joining us. First things first, the argument, and I'm sure you're also following the fascinating arguments that are happening in the Supreme Court of India on legalizing same-sex marriages. The argument that's being put forth by the petitioners is that you are denying basic civil rights by way of marriage to a particular class of citizens because of their sexual orientation. Those same rights you're extending to heterosexual couples, and that is a violation of basic human rights, violation of the Indian Constitution, so on and so forth. Where do you stand, and how do you view this ongoing, not just legal debate that's happening in India, but this is also a sociological debate, I believe?
Well, of course, I can't weigh in on Indian legal affairs. I'm not a constitutional law expert, never mind an Indian constitutional law expert. Of course, thinking on this issue has evolved globally, and different countries have come to different solutions. But let's remember, here in Australia, same-sex marriage only became a nationally accepted norm in 2017, so less than 6 years ago. In the United States, it was 2015. So this is really new territory. Different countries have handled it differently. In the United States, same-sex marriage came in through a similar mechanism to what seems to be going on in India, that it was a Supreme Court decision on the basis of construed fundamental rights, and it was highly controversial. It was a 5-4 decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, so it was by no means something that was a broad consensus. Instead, it was a very narrow majority. In Australia, by contrast, there was a referendum process, and the referendum won overwhelmingly. The referendum, the Australian citizens of Australia overwhelmingly supported the idea of gay marriage. And that's something we've seen in countries where it's been handled via referendum, or in individual U.S. states where it's been handled via referendum. Those states tended, or those countries have tended to approve the concept of same-sex marriage. In places where it has been imposed through judicial fiat, it has been highly controversial.
But during the course of the arguments, it seemed like the remit of the debate on legalizing same-sex marriage had been sort of expanded, if you will, where the Chief Justice went on to say that there is no concept of absolute man or absolute woman, and that gender cannot be defined by just male or female body parts. And I also understand that gender is also part biological construct and a part sociological construct. But are we now moving in a direction of extreme wokeism where, like I said in the earlier part of the program, on some days a person identifies themselves as male, and some days the person identifies themselves as female? Where are we headed with this, and how do we make sense of this?
Well, there was the odd phenomenon of the latest nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court being asked the simple question, can she define a woman? And she said, I'm not a biologist. Now, the funny thing is, for me as a sociologist, I thought she probably should have said, I'm not a sociologist, because our evolving definitions of gender and sexuality have little to do with biology and much more to do with sociology, which is how people choose to live in society. We can easily identify for almost everybody a clear sex in terms of chromosomal sex. People either have XX or XY chromosomes. There are a small number of people who have chromosomal abnormalities, where they have one is the aptly named triple X chromosome, which is a chromosome type that makes women appear extraordinarily feminine, and there are other chromosomal abnormalities. On top of that, there is the phenomenon of intersex appearance at birth, which means that even someone who has, say, an XX chromosome may develop aspects of male anatomical features, and vice versa, right? But these are very rare conditions. For most people, biologically, for most people, the vast majority of people, sex is not really at issue.
So then how do you frame this? Because, like you said, I mean, there are now individuals, as few of them as they are, but there are individuals who may have been born with male sexual organs, who may have been born as a man, but they identify themselves as a woman. I mean, this opens up a whole can of worms in terms of, violence against women. A trans woman who identifies herself as a woman can use mitigating factor in a case of violence against women, or even for something as simple as entry into bathrooms, right? A trans woman can say that, I identify myself as a woman and therefore I need to get entry into a women's bathroom, which may be offensive to the other cis women who may be using that bathroom at that time. How do you make these distinctions?
Well, what we used to teach is that sex is a biological construct and gender is a social construct. However, transgender activists have increasingly insisted that no, in fact, gender is a biological construct. That is, the argument is that if the mind perceives the body as being, let's say, female, then the person is female, and the XY chromosome and the male genitalia are pathologies of what is truly a female sexual being. That's a novel interpretation. It's one that's only arisen in the last 10 years, but it is an interpretation that has a lot of power, persuasive power, among certain communities. I can't say that it's false. All I can say is that it's novel. It's something new that people have started to claim that their gender identity is in fact their sexual identity, and the chromosomes and genitals are simply wrong. And ultimately, that's what the new transsexuality is all about. It's about correcting the genitals to match the psychological gender identity.
All right, we leave it at that. Professor Salvatore Babones, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. Thank you for your time.